Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Robert Schmid, also known as Mr IoT. I am the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte with a deep passion for all things digital. This week on Coffee with Mr IoT, Heather Ringel and I are talking with Andy Daecher. Andy, I want to call you Dr. IoT because you and I started the IoT practice way back. You're actually a repeat guest, so you kind of all know. And how are you doing, Andy? Thanks for joining us.
Doing great, doing great. A lot has changed since the last time I was on, Robert. So it's great to be back.
What's changed?
I feel like the market has really moved fast, and we're doing more interesting work. I think there's a lot more acceptance of that there's true value here in IoT solutions. I think we've figured out where some of those specific use cases are, and so I think things are growing and thriving, and I think back in when I was last on, we were just getting started.
So tell us, what are you spending most of your time on? What's the most interesting stuff that you're working on?
Well, I've been spending a lot of my time with industrial companies. That's where we're seeing a lot of the demand coming. In particular, heavy manufacturers are definitely investing in this space. I think in the case of heavy manufacturers, there's some trends that have driven them to sort of see the light that they need to be putting more technology into their products, into their processes, and the way that they work. Autonomous cars in the automotive industry is certainly one canary in the coal mine in this industry, and every heavy manufacturer can kind of see that those trends impacting their industry. And so I've been spending a lot of time at a particular company that's a manufacturer of heavy building machinery in one of their plants, and been doing some really interesting things with IoT and automation.
So Andy, what's different today than a year or 2 or 3 ago? Because if you think of it, I look at machines, and we talk to Dan Rhodes, one of our colleagues, all the time. Machines have been spitting out tons of data all the time. So What's different today, and what are we doing? I mean, I called it lighting up the factory. We're actually not even using the machine data that's on there, but just talk a little bit about what's different about today, what data we're using, and what are we doing to light up the factory?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of what's different, Robert, what I would say is, the data is out there, and it's been out there for quite some time. I think it's been somewhat stranded in a lot of cases, so it's not really connected to other forms of data. It's when you combine different data types that you generate some insight. So I might know, my machines are down or where they are in terms of location, but combining that with reasons and understanding exactly what happened, when they went down, and getting to the root cause data. So it's combining numbers of data sources, sorting through a lot of that real-time data. And I think probably the main thing, Robert, is when we started, there was no shortage of experimentation going on, a lot of tinkering, a lot of what I would call science projects, people that were just trying to figure out what's possible with some of the new technology and connectivity. And I think what's happened is that people are starting to figure out where the value lies. So there was a lot of doing things just because you can, rather than because there was clearly a business case or a business reason. And I think that's one of the key differences, is that a lot of those science projects have been discarded in a case where there really wasn't a clear tie to a value creating product or process efficiency or a new way of doing business. And I think many companies are starting to figure out where that value lies and investing in those, because they're seeing returns. In the case of the factory that I've been working in, this is really a discrete manufacturer, so they're making these heavy building machines, and they produce about 100 a day or on a production line in a factory. And there were 2 lines in this particular factory, and this factory was fairly well automated for the main assembly line. the main assembly line where they take a frame, attach the engines and various components. But once the machine exited the main assembly line, there were still a number of work steps needed to attach tools, do some quality inspection, do some final assembly and finishing. And it turns out that at this particular factory, the machines spend 90% of their time in those last steps. Getting most of the machine assembled was highly automated, and it took roughly half a day. You can get from core components to a finished good, and then they would spend 2, 3, 4 days in these final assembly processes. And in this case, the client really had no visibility once their machine exited the main assembly line and moved over to these final steps, where they were, what was going on, how to prioritize one going out the next day. So the problem that we helped them with was trying to provide some better visibility into these machines as they're going through these final work steps on their way out to their customers. And so the solution that we came up with was to put a sensor on the machine in the form of we had a magnetic hat that we stuck on top of the machine as it exited the main assembly line and entered these, they call it end-of-line processes. And we put sensors on those machines, and we're able to then gather data to know exactly where the machines were in which work step, how much time they were spending in each work step, and gathering a lot more granular data around quality. And so today in the factory, they actually had a person that would stand back there and with a manual spreadsheet keep track of which machines were in which work steps and which ones needed to be prioritized. We automated all that so that they have this person called the WIP coordinator can go on and really focus on more value-added activities. And instead, they now have a dashboard that in real time shows them exactly where the machines are. They can prioritize one machine over another based on due date and shipment or just the severity of the issue or challenge that they needed to face. So we call it lighting up the dark factory, because this back end process, this end of the line was really dark to the company.
Well, Andy, all the Homo sapiens out there listening to you will be so pleased to know there's something for them to do at the end of the line in the future. That's fantastic.
There's light at the end of the tunnel.
No pun intended. Yeah. So yeah, that's really interesting. I was interested to hear you say words like tinkering and experiments. That's one thing I wonder, being on, way more on the outside of this than you. If we look back a couple of years, this felt like the wild, wild west in terms of, the frontier that IoT was operating on. And so I wonder, are we progressing? How fast are we progressing along the continuum of, Wild West to mature? And, is it starting to feel like some norms are being created, some integrated ecosystems are being created, or does it still feel quite wild to you?
Yeah, I think there is some sorting out going on, and I think there's a lot more to come. I do believe that IoT, like a lot of other trends, even the World Wide Web, we probably overestimate initially how rapidly people are going to adopt, but in the long run, I think the technology will drive dramatic changes across almost every industry. But I think what we're seeing is the early adopters are the ones where they've really sorted out there's a clear business case around a solution that's enabled by IoT, and that's so you're starting to see those industries, those sectors starting to take the lead, and then some others, starting to follow behind. So it's still early days, I would say, but there's some shape that is starting to take form.
If you're just joining us, I'm Robert Schmid, Deloitte's Chief IT Technologist, and you're watching Coffee with Mr IoT. Today, Heather and I are talking to Andy Daecher, or Dr. IoT, as I decided to call him. He hasn't really taken it on yet. But Andy, I have a question for you. I thought of this a little bit back, and it reminds me of IoT reminds me of mobile phones, maybe, 8, 10 years ago, when you walked into a company, you had to go and explain why you needed a mobile phone and make a business case. And today, I'm just expected to have a phone when I show up at work, right? This isn't a question anymore. Do I need a mobile phone? And I did some, I was curious, right? And I looked up how many people are connected to the internet today. And it's like in the US, it's 90%. Worldwide, it's 50% of all people are connected to the internet. So in the US, 9 out of 10 people are connected to the internet. Do you think this is what's going to happen with things, that all things will be connected? And what's in the way to get there?
I do. I do. Eventually, I think there'll be almost everything we interact with will be in some way connected. Really, in my mind, is just what we talked about. Is trying to figure out where the value is to the consumer in having a connected device. And I think you and I have been at various points at the CES show, and there's been a lot of IoT at CES the last several years. And some of the things you look at and you just sort of scratch your head, like, the smart connected refrigerator in my mind is one of those. They show it every year, and every year you come away saying, wow, that's pretty cool, but would I actually pay for it? And is it actually, in the way it's currently concocted, is it really going to add value to my life? Now, I think that technology will come along, but I don't think it's at the stage of where there's a clear value to people in terms of buying a connected refrigerator just yet. So I think that's figuring out the nuance of how a connected machine actually improves the experience of using it, or in some cases, and I think it's maybe why we're seeing the industrial sector catch on early, because a lot of the value is somewhat behind the scenes. It's enabling companies to service their equipment more effectively, or have visibility so that they can prevent failures from occurring to their customers. But it's not, they're using some of the data of connected machines and not yet passing it on to their customers. I think that will come. There's a lot of nuance in those consumer interactions that has to be figured out. And I think, before we started, we were talking a little bit about retail, and I feel like that's a real interesting area, but there's not yet the full, kind of consumer interaction cycle figured out, where consumers really want to be connected at all times and have the retailer know that I'm in a store in a particular aisle and be sending some message. I think most people view that today as somewhat annoying, and certain retailers have tried that technology and found that people just delete the app because they kind of just get frustrated by being bombarded with so many notifications and things that they don't view as value add. So there's a lot of nuance in that interaction with people that has to be figured out. And, but I'm confident it'll get there. And I think, you could argue the same thing about mobile phones. People just need to get used to using them and figuring out how it could change their life. The fact that I could make a phone call from watching my kids playing soccer, or at least be reached, and having that be the norm versus not.
It's interesting. I work with airlines, and they've actually told me, we talk about the retail example being annoyed by notifications. And what I've heard from airlines is that actually people are very willing to adjust their behavior if you give them useful information. So if you give them information to say, please come 10 minutes earlier and your wait time will be cut in half, they actually do come 10 minutes earlier. They've done some research to show how willing people are and how influenceable people are in terms of their travel behavior, which I found really fascinating, which is really the basis for why there's so much consumer interaction with location-based services.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that makes perfect sense. But I think finding out, the sweet spot there, right? I mean, what information do people want and how much is really what's going on right now in my mind. There's a lot of figuring out going on, but it's going to take time just to zero in on that sweet spot for all these different connected devices.
Yeah, I agree. It's about finding that value spot that that motivates us to trade our privacy for value. So, it's that time in the show where I like to ask my resident feminist question. And not ashamed to play that role. So, I wonder in new ecosystems, new frontiers, I find this is the great opportunity for women to push up there and be part of the story in a way that we've never had access to do in revolutions of the past. So tell me, how many women are you operating with on a regular basis, and where are you seeing examples of because of this feminine quotient that was brought to the table, we have excelled?
Yeah, gosh. Well, I will say that our functional lead on this project that I was speaking about as a manufacturer is a woman, and a real key development lead for our practice. So it's hard for me to say how that perspective really resulted in but she's awesome. and I will, I guess one of the things I'd say is that you might be surprised that a large number of the people we worked with in the plant were women that were the factory workers at the particular factory we were working with. And I think one of the real challenges is it's kind of back to what we were speaking about, is getting those people to adopt this technology and design it in a way that's useful to the way they do their work. Because ultimately, these are factory workers that are having to leverage this technology. And I think Susan, who really did a lot of that design and worked with designing the application in a way that people could accept it and viewed it as value add and not a threat to them, was hugely instrumental in the success of this application and the people actually asking for it and wanting it and driving adoption. So, I don't. It's hard for me to say, but I would say that she, Susan brought a really nice personal touch to that, and in a very non-threatening way, and in a way that was brought the team along, a large number of whom were women in the factory, to this solution. And that was it was incredibly important to making this all work.
I just wanted to add, both of my directors on my recent client are female, one for innovation, the other one for data science and continued improvement. And they run the show there. It's really great to see, as far as I've seen. And, I love the creativity that comes out of the innovation side there, and what's going on there. I'm really looking forward to seeing the innovation in the airline industry. And by the way, all three of us will see the impact of this since we all travel so much. Andy, I want to shift the topic for a second. We're coming to that part of the show where after the feminist question, I get to ask the personal life question. So over the last year and a half, how has your personal life changed because of IoT? What have you done differently? What have you adopted? What have you not adopted, actually? It might be as interesting to see. I gotta believe you have at least 3 nests at home, but other than that, sort of like...
Interesting. I don't. It's funny. My wife, though, is a sort of the developer. So she's a house flipper, but we call her a developer. And so she does a lot of design of homes, and every one of her new projects has a lot more automation, and Nest is just, people expect it when they buy a new house. And unfortunately, I've still got an old system that I can't even make work in my Honeywell. And I keep asking Beth about it, and she's much more up to speed on the home automation, and she says that we couldn't make that work the way our heating system's designed just yet. So Nest hasn't quite come to. We have like 3 zones, and I don't know. So she told me that it's not. We're not a candidate just yet for where Nest is. I wish. but gosh, other than that, it's hard for so you know, like I said, I've been focused in the industrial sector, so I'm focused in manufacturing and supply chain. I guess I'm other than, you know, I got a new Fitbit, and I religiously wear that thing. It's gotten more sophisticated, right? So now it's measuring heart rate and some other things, not just steps. It can distinguish between my different types of exercise. So I have seen that technology evolve over the last 2 or 3 years to the point where, you know, the same form factor, very small, very lightweight, but a lot more information. And I think that's, you know, what's really, in a nutshell, what's driving a lot of you know, everything's getting smaller, more sophisticated, you know, cheaper per unit, and that's driving a lot of this innovation that we're talking about.
For any young people out there watching who are interested in career in IoT, what's the most fun part of your job?
Well, I mean, what's interesting to me is there's so much figuring out to do that it takes some domain knowledge of understanding and as we've talked about in the industrial sector, really understanding manufacturing processes and how some of this technology and automation is really going to lead to value. But there's real design challenges that come up. These are not, you know, plug in a disk, you know, implement, you know, turn it on, and the application gets installed. So you know, we ran into that in this factory environment. So you think that it'll be fairly straightforward to put a sensor, you know, that there would be some off-the-shelf product to be able to track a machine through a factory, and in our case, it was inside the factory and out. It went outside the factory for certain times because it goes. Once it finishes, it goes out in the yard, they do some tests, and then it comes back in, they put some work tools on it. So it's moving around quite a bit. And so we, you know, initially thought, well, there must be some fairly straightforward off-the-shelf technology to be able to track both inside and outside. But we found that was a real unique situation, especially in an environment like a factory. There's a lot of metal, a lot of interference that the Wi-Fi and some other things we were initially thinking about weren't really good solutions. So we had to come up and really create a device. And so this is really a new part of our job, and this is getting us into that area where we had to fashion a device that includes an RFID sensor for inside and a radio for outside once it goes out. And then and so we actually created a little hat that had these two sensors built into it that gets attached to each of these machines, and figure out how to manufacture those in a limited run. So it's getting us into new areas and new design challenges, and I think that's not going to stop. I think for the next several years, each of these projects is somewhat different. There's going to be unique situations you run into, and so for people that love problem solving, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you saw the show, Andy, but we had one of our young consultants on the show who had a Google Home talk to an Alexa, and they went back and forth, and he showed that off on the show. So that was fun. So beside being on the show with us, if you're joining Deloitte, we also have jobs open, by the way. We are recruiting right now. And so, you know, you can join the team. And with that, we're coming to the end of our show. Andy, thank you very much. It was great having you again. We should do this every couple months. I think actually even the team appreciates seeing you and I kind of riffing a little bit and then throwing in the spice, which is always great. I want to thank you. Please join Heather and again next Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern. 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another Coffee with Mr. IoT. And by the way, if you missed any part of today's conversation, you can watch it again on my YouTube channel. And with that, I'm going to go back on vacation. Happy weekend, everyone. Happy Friday. And thanks for joining. Bye.
All right. Thank you.